I'm Mark Anderson with American Free Press. I volunteered to introduce the next speaker. And she's a really hard worker. It's amazing. Vickie Karp, I've known Vickie, I don't know, 2 to 3 years now. It started over phone conversations, and then it became more in-depth news interviews, including in person. The last time I saw her was at a coffee shop for the Ron Paul Liberty Ball in late January '08 in Austin. And it was so noisy in there we couldn't really talk, and now we finally are at the same event where we can really jaw a little bit, and I'll be shooting some news video of her later for AmericanFreePress.net, where we post a lot of news videos now with our news stories. And Vickie and her confreres in the election honesty movement, Karen Rennick and Bev Harris and Abby Delosier and others, mostly with Vote Rescue, that organization based in Texas, they're really the pioneers, in my opinion, of this, those ladies. And Texas is really a hot spot for a lot of things for American Free Press, the Trans-Texas Corridor and things of that nature. And it's really a key state in so many ways, and it just so happens for election honesty, too. That seems to be where the rubber meets the road. And so Vickie Karp here, over the years that I've talked to her, has really shown the inner workings, working with her associates, of how dishonest our elections can be, even though they appear to be on the level. And what's amazing to me is that even a couple of years ago, even though I had an inkling that these things might be true, Vickie, more than anyone, showed me as a reporter, and I tried to report it faithfully and honestly. She showed me that there's such a subtle way that our democratic institutions can be undermined. And it's amazing of voting machines now that are electronic, where the source code can be completely and purposely corrupted and intentionally undermined. So when you press a button for candidate A, the inside of the machine says, oh, you voted for candidate B. Flipping the vote around and other manipulations. Because I had thought that our problems were limited to not enough media coverage of alternative candidates and the way the ballot access laws block out alternative parties and alternative candidates to keep their ideas off the ballot, so people are limited in their choices. And that's one way to rig elections. But Vickie, more than anyone, has shown that a major invasive way that elections are rigged is through these electronic voting machines made by Diebold and other companies that are politically connected, and there's lots of incentives for corruption and collusion. So on that note, I'll let Vickie Karp here from Austin, Texas, explain the inner workings and the progress, the inner workings of the electronic voter fraud and the progress to overcome it. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Vickie Karp.
You take this, because I'm hooked up. Good morning. Thank you, Mark, one of the only media people who's really reported this issue and reported it faithfully. He has, and I really am grateful to you for that, and American Free Press. So we're going to switch gears now to a political topic that's very important: electronic voting machine fraud and what we can do about it, what is being done about it. So back in 2003, when an investigative journalist named Bev Harris from Washington State started noticing that there were news stories from all around the country about electronic voting machine problems that were starting to pop up from the 2002 midterm election, she started doing some research for her book, Black Box Voting, Ballot Tampering in the 21st Century, because she thought that there was something going on with electronic voting. And boy, was she right. She got on the website of Diebold, which is the second largest vendor of electronic voting machines in America, and she found these 43,000 files that looked very suspicious to her, including having some real election results from the 2002 midterm elections right there on the files on the website of the company. So she wasn't sure exactly what these files were, but they seemed like sensitive information that she wanted. So she downloaded them. It took her a couple of days. She had some computer programmers review it with her. What they determined it was actually a handbook on how to tamper with an election. Instructions on how to tamper with an election embedded right there, not embedded, but right there in plain sight in the Diebold election software. Shocking. So she downloaded the files, but then she set up a mock election on her laptop using the instructions in the Diebold election software, and managed to hack into a hidden back door and flip election results on her mock election in less than 3 minutes. And we call this the central tabulator hack, and the instructions for that, what she found in the Diebold software. The central tabulator hack, the conception for that is that you have precincts that are reporting in their results into a county website, and then there's this last sort of final page that has all the grand totals in it. And that last page, where all the grand totals are, there is a duplicate hidden page. And that's what can be accessed if you know how to do it, where you just go in and you just can flip numbers around or change numbers around. And nobody seemed to have been adding up all the individual totals to see if in the end the grand total matched up. So we call this a central tabulator hack, which she was able to execute in less than 3 minutes. So it was a fateful day for me in July of 2003 when I turned on my car radio to Alex Jones, Info Warrior, and he was in the middle of an interview with this woman. I'd never heard of her. She's now sort of known in the election integrity movement as the Erin Brockovich of election integrity and exposing this issue. So I sort of caught it mid-interview. And I was in my car, and I just couldn't believe my ears. I had to pull over, and I got out my yellow pad because I thought, you know, I'm a Toastmaster, and I'm always looking for a new speech topic, and all my Toastmaster friends had already heard all my stories, and I'm always looking for something new. I thought, wow, you know, if this is true, this will make a great speech for Toastmasters. So for me, what started out as a Toastmaster speech, you know, 6 years ago has turned into this passion, this thing I just can't let go of. I got on Bev's website, and I found her phone number, and I called her, and she just, you know, answered her cell phone, and I thought, because as I was listening to her with Alex Jones, I was thinking, I had followed the Watergate scandal in the 70s, and I wanted to be Woodward and Bernstein. You know, I wanted to be the kind of person that could unveil that type of corruption, and I just always admired them, you know, for that. And I thought, man, if this story is true, well, Bev Harris is like Woodward and Bernstein all wrapped up in one person. She answers the phone, and I already feel like I'm talking to a celebrity. I said, it's you. So I told her I heard her on Alex Jones, and I said, I want to do a speech about this. And she says, that is great, because you know what? The only way we're ever going to turn this thing around is citizens getting involved, grassroots level, grassroots level. She's very right about that. So that was the beginning of my journey into the belly of the beast of American elections, and I can tell you it's not a pretty sight. I can tell you that it is a paradigm-busting situation, and that's the problem, that one of the major problems that we have in trying to educate people. I know people in this room really understand that there are a lot of things out there that are called conspiracy theories that really aren't theories, and this happens to be a big one of those. So it really is an honor to be here with you today to delve into the topic of election fraud in America, which is a topic that really affects every American, whether they know it or not, and ultimately will determine whether we really remain a free people or the best type of slave, the slaves who think they're free. So let me begin with a question, theoretical question. If our elected officials are regularly committing crimes with their policies and passing unconstitutional laws, we're supposed to be able to vote them out, right? That's how we're supposed to be able to control what's happening, the policies that we're being affected by every day. Well, you know, there are a couple of sets of statistics I finally put together in my brain the other day on this topic, made me think about this question. One is, have you all seen the statistics about, I hear it from time to time, especially last year, George Bush's last year, about the very low approval rating of Congress. You all are familiar with that? Yeah. I think last May it was 18%. I think now it's up to a roaring 30%, something like that. People clearly do not approve of the job that our congressional leaders are doing, plundering the country right now. Unbelievable. So what about this other statistic, though, that we hear about incumbents getting reelected? Have y'all heard about that statistic? 96% of incumbents get reelected. Now, how is that possible? Right? Those two things do not jive. There's a logical problem right there. And then let's take a look for a moment at exit polls. Exit polls that don't match election results. That's something that's been coming up in the last decade more and more each election cycle. And then we have these pundits who are trying to explain to us why that happened. Hillary cried. People felt sorry for her at the last minute, and they voted for her in the primary because they felt sorry for her. Or the secret racist voter. And Hillary won in some places because the voters were actually, they were racist, but they didn't want to admit it. But when they actually got in there to vote, they couldn't make themselves vote for a black man. These are the absurd stories that we're being told to explain why exit polls don't match election results. Ridiculous. And you know, the question that nobody's asking on mainstream media is, what about the voting machines? What about the voting machines? So what if elections have been rigged so cleverly in such an undetectable manner that no one knows for sure who's really winning anymore? Because votes are being counted in secret by computerized touchscreen voting machines and optical scan counters which count paper ballots. And what if our so-called democratic elections are really just a facade where we pretend to vote and they pretend to get elected? Here's what we know, the people that have been working on this for years. Our elections have been hijacked with electronic voting machines that are sold by corporate vendors with highly partisan conflicts of interest. They're executed by election officials, many of whom's best friends are the vendors of these voting machines. And perhaps the worst part of it, the mainstream media, the corporate media, will not report the truth about it. That's why, again, I want to give a lot of credit to Mark Anderson. He's done a great job on reporting on this. So we don't really have elected officials in America right now. What we have are selected officials. And in a way, when I realized the truth of this, although it was a huge shock, and it was just, as I said, a paradigm-shifting piece of knowledge that it's like, wow, you know, we're the beacon of democracy. We're out there killing everyone to export democracy to the rest of the world that doesn't want it. And we don't really have it here. We really don't. We pretend to vote. They pretend to get elected. But, you know, it was almost a comforting thought in a way, in this way, because as I saw what George Bush was doing the last two administrations, and by the way, I'm an independent, so it's not a Democrat for me, and it's a nonpartisan issue. But as I watched us becoming more and more of a police state, entering into more closer and closer to globalism and torture and these horrible, nightmarish things that were happening, at first I thought, the American people voted for this guy. But then when I found this out, I went, oh, thank God they really didn't vote for him. You know? Thank God they really didn't vote for this guy, you know? Kind of a relief in a way. I've done a lot of radio. I had a radio show with my friend Karen Rennick, who's the founder of Vote Rescue. We had a Vote Rescue radio show for a year, and I also got on a lot of other radio shows last year prior to the election. I got on a radio show in Canada. It was the first time I was on a radio show outside the country, and the first statement I made was, it's a great relief to me to be able to say this to people outside our country that for the first time. We never elected George W. Bush. We never elected him either time. So I want to tell you that as a statement that I can back up with fact. I'm going to talk about Florida in a minute. Ohio is where this election was stolen in 2004. Some of you may know that. There are volumes of books. I just didn't want to carry all of them with me on the plane. But this book here, Conyers Report on the 2004 presidential election, House Judiciary Committee did hearings on this. And there is a ton of evidence about that. So it was a relief to me to be able to just finally tell someone outside the country, no, we really didn't elect him, and don't blame us, okay? So how did we get to the point where 90% of voters in November either cast their ballot on or had it counted by some sort of electronic voting machine. I'm going to go back now to the 2000 election and talk about something that a lot of you will remember, hanging chads. How many of y'all remember the guy with the thick glasses holding up a ballot with a magnifying glass, trying to figure out if the chad was dimpled, pregnant, or hanging? How many of y'all remember that? Almost everyone in the room. You know, it was just, all this was on TV for weeks, and a lot of the American public did watch that. After I learned a lot about electronic voting machine fraud, I thought back on that, and I thought, you know what? I'll bet that hanging chad thing was really a red herring to get us into electronic voting. Well, I kind of felt like that was probably the case. Well, now we know that was the case. And a very well-known investigative journalist or TV journalist named Dan Rather actually did a documentary in 2007, an HDNet documentary called The Trouble with Touchscreens. The first half of it had to do with the top voting machine vendor, ES&S, and how they manufacture their machines in Manila, Philippines, and the only testing they do before sending the machines over here is a shake test to see if anything's rattling in the machine before they send it over here for us to vote on. Nothing to do with security or accuracy, just the shake test, and a lot more. It's actually almost unbelievable. But the second half of the documentary has to do with hanging chads, with the whole chad situation. He interviewed 7 whistleblowers from a company called Sequoia Pacific. Sequoia Pacific is one of the top 4 vendors of electronic voting machines in the country today, but they also manufactured punch card ballots, many of which were sent to Florida in 2000. And so some of these people had the authority for quality control, to reject paper that was being sent, these giant rolls of paper that were being used to manufacture ballots. So some of them had the authority to reject paper if it was inferior quality or the ballots were not coming out the way they should. And so one of the stories that was told by one of these whistleblowers is that these big rolls of paper would come in, and there was sort of a joke in there that this guy would write these 4-letter words when they were rejecting a roll of paper and send it back. Well, they knew that they were being sent back the same paper because they got back a roll where he'd written one of his 4-letter words, and the management was saying, use this paper. Use this paper. So they were manufacturing these ballots that had chad problems, and then ultimately, before they would ever ship their ballots, they had a testing procedure. I think it's called a gang punch, where they pull down this perforation thing, and it punches out every chad so they can see if the chads are punching out the way they're supposed to or not. And they could see that they were not punching out properly, and they were complaining to the management that they should not be sending these ballots out because they were faulty and they were, problematic. And management said, no, you're sending them. You're sending them. And guess where they went? They went to Florida. They went to Florida. The results? 73,000 ballots rejected in the Florida election, 4% of all the votes statewide, and many of them in Palm Beach, Miami-Dade, and Broward counties, all with high minority populations who represented clear Democratic strongholds. What started this whole recount process was that there was a difference of about 3,600 votes, I believe it was, between Bush and Gore. So we're talking about 73,000 ballots being rejected. So one of them was asked by Dan Rather, why do you think the management did this? Why do you think they forced you to send faulty ballots to Florida? He said, well, I don't really know for sure, but I think one reason is because they manufactured electronic voting machines and they were so expensive that as long as everyone was using punch card ballots, there was no reason for anybody to buy the electronic voting machines. That's probably one of the reasons. I'm just guessing. So that was one of the top 4 companies that there's evidence now to support, it's clear evidence that this is what happened. And then I was introduced to a writer named Steve Singular, not very well known. He got on the trail of the same situation after the 2000 election because he had friends in Florida who got absentee ballots, punch card ballots, and they were going to be out of town, and so they got these absentee ballots, and they tried to punch their Chad through, and it popped back up. That was another thing that they would do. They popped back up so that the machine would not count them. And so they saw that, and they ended up pulling it out and cutting it or whatever, you know. And they thought, gee, that's really weird that these Chads didn't work the way they were supposed to. So then when this recount situation happened with all the Chad problems, they called Steve Singular, this writer who lives in Denver, and he came out there and they started this whole investigation, and he found the same thing that Dan Rather did, only with a different vendor, Electronic Systems and Software, which is the #1 vendor of electronic voting machines in the country. Nobody ever really did anything with his story. I had him on our radio show. That was the first time he ever got publicity for what he tried to do. He actually got courted by 60 Minutes, who said they were going to do a story about this, and they had made him sign something saying he wouldn't take any credit for the research. That once Mike Wallace got involved, you know, that it had to be his story, and this guy couldn't get any credit for it. He said, I don't care about the credit. I just want people to know what happened. So he signed away all these waivers that he would stop investigating. He promised he wouldn't keep investigating, so he stopped. And he kept waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. They kept saying, yes, you know, in another week, in another month, we're going to have the story. Well, they never did the story. They never did the story. So ultimately, he went to Dallas to an ES&S ballot, punch card ballot manufacturing plant, and saw a lot of things there that, and he was told by this guy that gave him a tour, he says, you know, ES&S punch card ballot manufacturing plant. This guy says, we live in a 1/5,000th of an inch world around here. He said, what do you mean? He says, well, 1/5,000th of an inch one way, the Chad won't come out. And 1/5,000th of an inch another way, and multiple Chads will fall out. So just to know that this whole hanging Chad thing was, all that was just contrived to bring in what's referred to as the Help America Vote Act, another Orwellian policy, kind of like the Clear Skies Initiative, No Child Left Behind, the Patriot Act. There was a Help America Vote Act, or HAVA as we call it, passed in 2002, supposedly to improve our voting systems in America. Now, it was a federal mandate to the states, and they offered $3.86 billion of our taxpayer dollars, encouraging the states to upgrade their voting systems, to get rid of their punch card and lever voting machines. It didn't say they had to buy electronic voting machines, but there was this sort of misunderstanding that happened that was sort of allowed to occur, where these, you know, state election officials and county election officials were thinking, well, I have to buy electronic voting, because that's somehow that they were led to believe that. There was the real mandate involved in HAVA was that each precinct had to have in place by 2006 one voting system minimum for the disabled to allow them to vote without assistance. We think that they were used sort of like as a scapegoat to, like, who would oppose the disabled being able to vote without assistance? Nobody. Of course, everyone wants that, right? So here come these 4 big vendors then saying, oh, well, we have the HAVA compliant voting machines that will fulfill the requirement for the disabled, which everyone had to have in place by 2006, one way or the other. And really, this was the only thing that all of a sudden here these vendors are right out the hatch going, we've got the voting machines. So the top 4 vendors, I've mentioned a couple of them, but just to reiterate, Electronic Systems and Software, or ES&S, the Diebold Company, which has changed its name to Premier Election Systems because of all the bad press they've gotten, the Sequoia Company, and Hart InterCivic, the kind we use in my hometown, Austin, Texas, supposedly an improvement in voting systems. Here's some just bullet-pointed facts about these voting systems. The software, as Mark mentioned, that operates these computerized voting systems, it's trade secret, proprietary secret. So nobody gets to look under the hood, no one gets to look at the software, not even the election officials who are executing your elections and telling you that your votes are being counted properly. The federal testing agencies that review electronic voting machines and supposedly give them the stamp of approval, you know who pays them? The vendors. The vendors. Bev Harris went to one of the testing agencies a few years ago. She comes up with these brilliant ideas. Took in her video camera person, Kathleen Wynn, the guy named Sean Southworth, I think his name was. and asked him if, first of all, they didn't test for accuracy of the count. Just a little point there. Then she said, well, if you find something wrong with the voting machines, what do you do? Do you put it in your report? Oh, no, we can't do that. The vendors wouldn't like that. So these testing agencies were supposedly being reassured by our state officials. Oh, don't worry, they've been tested through the blah, blah, blah testing agency. So now you know the truth about that. Of course, a lot of these paperless touchscreens have modems, which allow for manipulation of elections from remote locations, and that was part of what Bev Harris found when she started investigating the Diebold touchscreen machines. But something that is not widely discussed at all is that the scanners, the electronic scanners that count paper ballots, have the exact same central tabulator software that allow for the exact same sort of hack that I was describing that Bev Harris found. And I'll get into a story here in just a minute that will detail a hack that she executed with her hacking team, or they did, on a scanner. So, and it's important to make a note of that, because that's one of the solutions that's being put out there. And a lot of people think, well, let's just use paper ballots and then we can count them on scanners. But I'm going to explain to you in a little bit more about why that's not really the answer. And then, of course, there are these incredible conflicts of interest in the ownership, mostly tied to top Republicans, I will say. But I will say this, that both sides of the aisle have benefited from electronic voting machine fraud, from what we can see. And we have been shocked and amazed at some of the politicians on both sides of the aisle that we brought volumes of evidence to, and expecting that, oh, I'm over the day when I thought, maybe so-and-so will help us, maybe this person will help us. Nobody's helped us. No matter who we hand this to. In the political world, there just maybe a couple of people, who've actually said, let me do something about this, or tried to help us. Most of them have just totally ignored us. I'll get to that. Okay, so Bev Harris began sounding the alarm about this in August of 2004 in an attempt to warn the American people that the upcoming presidential election could be stolen, and she demonstrated on CNBC, and Howard Dean was actually co-hosting that show that day, the central tabulator hack. So we were all very excited because we thought, wow, this is big time, media coverage, and nothing happened. Nobody did anything. Howard Dean didn't do anything. Nobody in the Democratic Party did anything. Or nobody in the Republican Party did anything. So we're just, slogging along. So then, the co-editor of my book, Hacked, High-Tech Election Theft in America, Abby Waldman-Delosier, she's a citizen activist who knows how to do press conferences. So we had this idea, let's go to Washington, D.C. and do a press conference about this. So in September of 2004, we rented the National Press Club in Washington, and we held a press conference. We did it twice that day. And the title of the press conference was called Hacking the Presidency, a Bipartisan Problem, Anyone Can Do It. And together with some other computer experts, Bev and these other people showed 6 ways to hack an election with 2 different types of software. Sequoia, and they had accidentally left their election software on the internet and had been found by somebody. And then the central tabulator hack that I've described to you. Bev even had this idea that we did do, which was, she said, this is so easy to do, this hacking the central tabulator. She says, I think I could train a chimp to do this. And Abby had some cousin in Hollywood that had a chimp, So before we went to Washington, Bev flew down to Hollywood, and actually they trained a chimp to hack an election. Yeah. And if you go to blackboxvoting.org and look for the Baxter video, it's called, his name was Baxter, and it's very cute. And so that was in the press kit. And all the mainstream media showed up, but this is how they reported. Well, these people came in, and these computer guys came in, and they demonstrated some stuff and showed that, maybe you could hack an election. But then they had the final quote was from David Baer of the Diebold Company saying, well, that was just a dog and pony show that could never be reproduced in real election conditions. So with all of that effort, again, the mainstream media failed to sound an alarm. And I thought, man, those Woodward and Bernstein days are really over. So then we realized I remember Abby was crying in the next morning because she looked up on a Google News alert or whatever to find out what stories were written, and as she read them, she just started crying. She said, the media is just controlled. And I mean, we kind of knew that, but when we saw the way they handled that story, we realized that we are just going to have to be the media on this and appreciate whatever coverage we do get so much, and then try to sound the alarm ourselves, being the media, which we have tried to do. So just to get into a couple more stories here that I think are really of interest. Bev decided to go to a hackers convention and see if she could meet some hackers that might be willing to look at the Diebold software that she had, and then if they ever had a chance to look at some real electronic voting machines too, that she'd have these experts to play around with that and see what was under the hood. So she found these two guys. One was Dr. Herbert Thompson from Florida. One was a Finnish security computer programmer named Harry Hursti, who decided that, yeah, they would team up with her, and they looked at the Diebold software and validated everything she had said about it, which Johns Hopkins and Rice University had also done right after she did her little hack with that. But about this time, there was an HBO documentary being made about her called Hacking Democracy. I don't know if has anyone seen this? It's a really incredible film about Bev Harris and her research. And it took 2 or 3 years to film. And the filmmakers knew she had this hacking team, so they approached this election official in Florida named Ian Sancho from Leon County, Florida. I think that's Jacksonville area. And they said, hey, Ian, and this guy had a great reputation for 18 years. In fact, during the Florida recount of 2000, the Florida Supreme Court had selected him as the technical expert to oversee the recount procedures there, which of course were unfortunately brought to an abrupt end by the U.S. Supreme Court, which, as many of you may recall, ordered the ballots to not be counted, thereby handing the presidency to George W. Bush. But Ian Sancho, great reputation, so he was approached by these filmmakers, okay, why don't you let these guys come in and see if they can do anything with your Diebold scanners? He says, okay, bring it on, bring it on. So what they did was they came in and they created a mock election with one question on it. Can the Diebold optical scan counters be hacked using just a memory card, which is like a little credit card sized card that stores all the votes as the ballots are run through the machine, and then it causes the machine to print out a total tape. That was the question because Bev Harris, in a public hearing, I think it was in Ohio, had kind of nailed this Diebold guy by asking him publicly, and it's on the record, can Diebold machines be hacked just using the memory card? And he went on the record as saying, no, they can't. So that was the question. Because a lot of people have access to the memory cards. A lot of people can switch them out. It's not a hard thing to do. So there were 8 people there for this mock election. The question was, as I said, can these Diebold machines be hacked using just a memory card? So the 2 computer guys voted yes, hand-marked their ballots. Everyone else voted no. So we had 2 yeses, 6 no's. They run the ballots through. Out comes a total tape. 7 yeses, 1 no. Totally flipped, different numbers. And Ian Sancho, I mean, it's in this movie. Hacking Democracy. You can buy it off their website, our website too, hackedelections.com. We sell it. This is an incredible movie. And when you see this, I mean, a movie is worth 1,000,000 words, you know. I mean, we've had people that say, I didn't know anything about this, but I saw this Hacking Democracy. It was played on HBO. It was nominated for an Emmy. And they played it before the 2004 election in November. Like, we could do anything about it then, or October, November. But they played it again this last year, right before the election. So Ian Sancho said, you know, I would have certified these election results if I had not known, if I didn't know that he'd switched out the memory card. He was shocked. There was a citizen there who starts crying. She was, you know, someone who does the same work we do. She does it in Florida. And she says, they all call us conspiracy theorists, and it's happening right here. Nobody, you know, you don't even know how many times it's happening. So it's very powerful. And again, just to mention, these scanners are being used as the so-called solution when touchscreen voting is finally going out. It's like trying to turn this giant ocean liner around in the ocean to get from electronic voting to our solution, which is actually hand-counted paper ballots with enhanced security procedures. And I will detail that a little bit more. So we're going like, you know, the snail's pace, and we're going from here, now we're about over to here, where they're saying, okay, we're going to get rid of these electronic voting machines, but we're going to use paper ballots, and we're going to count them by scanner. Well, okay, so you can see the problem with that. So this stunning hack that happened in Leon County rocked the election integrity world. And what happened to Ian Sancho? Well, the state of Florida tried to take his job for letting these people come in and mess with the machines. He got audited by the IRS. His court costs came up to, his lawyer fees came up to something like $60,000. But ultimately, he was defended by the people in his county in the Miami Herald, and he did keep his job. He was forced to use Diebold machines, though, because no other vendor would sell to him. They all kind of got together and went, we're going to show him. Nobody would. He says, I'm not going to use these machines, and none of the other vendors would sell to him. So there was actually an antitrust situation that came up. He ended up having to use the Diebold scanners after all, but he doesn't trust them. And his is a quote from him. This is what politics have become in the U.S. It's a joke that people should trust in the electoral process. Ian Sancho. Well, Bev Harris and her hacking team had another exploit in Emory County, Utah the next year. And there was an election official there named Bruce Funk, who's very much like Ian Sancho, very well respected in his community. He does a great job, high integrity guy, 23 years as the election official there, 1 year to retirement. And all of a sudden, he was taking delivery of these 40 Diebold touchscreen machines where they had added the printers for a verified, voter verifiable paper audit trail. And this is the other solution that's being brought forward is, we'll just add printers to the machines and everything's going to be fine. And then you have your little receipt that you can look at. Now, we used to think it sounds good. I mean, it sounds good. But the reality of that, as you will see, really is not good. It really isn't. So these printers were attached. He starts testing the machines, and they start screwing up, and the printers are malfunctioning, jamming up. Then he finds that it looks like some of these machines don't have any backup memory, which made him wonder if they were used and maybe had some election stuff from someplace else. They were sold to him as new machines. So he started worrying because he had an election coming up. He knew about Bev Harris's hacking team. He knew about Ian Sancho in Leon County, Florida. So, and he knew, he called Bev Harris, says, you need to talk to Ian because he went through hell after what he did. And you may go through hell too if you have us come out there. So he talked to Ian, he talked to his wife, and he just thought, you know what, I want to find out what's going on with these machines. So he invited them in. Now, here's some of the comments made by computer experts about the hack on the Diebold touchscreens with printers added. The most severe security flaw ever discovered in a voting system. Michael Seamus, Carnegie Mellon, professor of computer science. Sophisticated architecture for hacking with 3 backdoors that allow the system to be modified in extremely flexible ways without even basic levels of security involved. That was in Hari Hursty's report, who did the hack. Avi Rubin, professor of computer science at Johns Hopkins University, was less technical in his response to the hack. He just said, I almost had a heart attack. The implications of this are pretty astounding. Now, Bruce Funk issued a security alert to the county election officials and the state election officials about this. These are the findings. These machines aren't safe. So what happened to him? Well, the state election officials flew the Diebold attorneys in on the governor's plane, and they had a secret meeting where he was locked out. And then he came back to work the next morning. He was locked out of his office, so he was fired. Then he was audited by the IRS. Then he had health problems. He lost a lot of his friends that worked in the county election office who thought he did the wrong thing. So this guy was beaten down, you know. He put it all on the line. He lost. And I got to meet him because we flew him in as we were invited to bring in some experts at the state level to a Capitol hearing last summer. We flew in Bruce. He says he has no regrets and he would do it all again. He says, yeah. He says, we have to fight this battle to get our elections back, and we can't stop for a moment. An amazing patriot. Thank you. So, just one more, I'm just going to highlight this one more quick story before I get into more about the good news that I promised yesterday, last night at the banquet, and a couple other things. And I have information about this on a table out here on a lot of the things I'm going to be talking about, but I put this out on your tables. These are examples. These are just from the 2004 election. This is a map of the United States with problems from every major voting machine vendor detailed on the back. And this is just partial list from one election. Every election cycle, there are thousands of cases like this that nobody knows about because nobody's paying any attention except people like us and Mark. So, just the one other quick story before I wrap it up here. Clint Curtis, computer programmer from Florida, back in 2000 was working for a company called Yang Enterprises. a state Florida representative named Tom Feeney came in and ordered a vote-flipping software to be used with electronic voting machines. Clint was requested to design it. At the time, he was a very dedicated Republican, and he thought, okay, this is so that they can weed out the Democrats who are going to hack the election in Florida. You know? So he designed this vote-flipping software, undetectable, to be used with electronic voting machines. And the day that Tom Feeney came to pick it up, his boss, Mrs. Yang, told him, oh, no, he wants it so that he can flip some elections in South Florida. That's why he ordered it. Well, Clint Curtis was actually, you know, an honest guy. And he you know, now he regrets he ever did that. But he came forward. What he did was he quit the Republican Party. He quit his job. He gave a sworn affidavit about all this. Which is on, you can YouTube his name and you can find him giving testimony about this. Yang offered him $1 million not to tell his story, but he did anyway, because he has a stronger love of freedom than he does of money. Clint Curtis, another fine patriot. So we've had the opportunity to meet some really heroic people in this battle. So I guess you can see that when Jimmy Carter says that elections in our country are so suspect they don't meet the standards of third world nations where he goes to monitor, you can see that he is correct. At the same time, we got all this information to Jimmy Carter, and what did he do? Nothing. Nothing. Jimmy Carter, the champion of fair elections. You see what I mean? We just keep taking it to another person, another person, another person. So it's like, okay, we're just going to do this ourselves. That's what we have to do. So the evidence is irrefutable. We've got, now we've got a four-page list of reports and hacks that's on my table out there. Princeton, Caltech, MIT, Johns Hopkins, Rice, Brennan Justice Center, the University of California study, which I'll talk about in a minute. The evidence is just irrefutable. Thank goodness. So it's no longer a question of is it true? It's a question of what are people going to do about it? And just one more point about these scanners, though. I want to get back to that because I think I've covered the paper trail issue. I just want to make one more point about it. The printers and the scanners both. People say, if you have paper, at least you can do a recount. That's a common refrain that we hear. Let me tell you something I'll bet none of you know. 2 election workers from Ohio in 2007 were indicted, convicted, and sentenced for hacking the recount in Ohio in 2004. 3 years after the election was over, these 2 women who were caught on videotape by Kathleen Wynne of Black Box Voting admitted that they had pre-selected the ballots for the recount, which is against the law, and that they had pre-counted them before the public count, which is against the law. So we hear about this 3 years later, and yet the only news story I heard about it that was on YouTube is the local news in Cleveland. And they say, but election officials, they end it this way, election officials say it didn't affect the results of the election, no one needs to worry. George Bush, John Kerry, yeah, I mean, what is, but I'm just saying, this is what happened, okay? So the recount situation we can't count on because when the stakes are high, they just hack the recount. So you have to be aware of that. And that's why we say you have to get it right on election night. We say hand-counted paper ballots, citizens executing our elections, not corporations. This is secret vote counting controlled by big corporations. That's what we've got right now. We want to put it back in the hands of the citizens. Now just picture this, video cameras on a ballot box all day. The ballot box never leaves the room before multi-partisan teams of counters come in at 7 o'clock. They break the seal on the ballot box. They count the votes right there before the ballot box ever goes anywhere. Video cameras, news teams, citizen monitors, and they post the totals at the precinct level so that if that ballot box ends up in the river or with dead people's names later, like we love to hear about, it won't matter because those totals are already posted. Everybody knows what they are. Will that be done by the 10 o'clock news? I don't know. I don't know. Should that be our priority? No. No, it shouldn't be. Wrong answer. It should not be our priority, but I find that we're working at our county level and we're looking at this study that was done that selected these hard intercivic machines for us in 2000, and the priority given to select a machine was what could count the ballots in time for the 10 o'clock news to get the result? That was one of the main priorities. So we're getting involved in the next election study group, and we're going to turn the tide on that one. So we have been working at the federal level to stop legislation on paper trails. And every year, Rush Holt of New Jersey comes out with some version of a paper trail bill, and all these friends of ours that don't know that much about it, they'll, oh, look, it's a paper trail bill. Aren't you excited? We go, no. No, that's the wrong answer, and here's why. So there's so many intricacies and distinctions that if you don't know, then it's like problem, reaction, solution. Now, let's do the paper trails, paper trails won't work. Scanners won't work. Recounts don't work. Get it right on election night. So, we're working at county level. We go to the county commissioner's court. They pay for the machines with our tax dollars. So we've been hammering them. Don't buy any more machines. And we're starting to have some impact there. And I did say some of the good news I want to get into at our Texas level. Yesterday, on my way here, Karen Rennick, who's the founder of Vote Rescue, and we work very closely together on a lot of these projects, she's been lobbying the Texas legislature to get somebody to file the Texas hand-counted paper ballot bill of 2009. And yesterday she succeeded in getting somebody to file that bill for us. So that's a big victory for us in Texas. And although the chances of it passing are probably zero, we will get a hearing now at the House Committee of Elections, which will allow us to bring in a lot more evidence. We did this in 2007. We got someone to sponsor the bill then. And it allowed us to come in and just put a lot of evidence on the table, raise awareness, educate a lot of people. So that was a huge deal. Right here in California, the Secretary of State, Deborah Bowen, did an amazing thing in 2006 by executing through the University of California, I mentioned a study that they did, an amazing study of all the top 4 vendors, which resulted in her immediate decertification of all the touchscreen systems that they all made. Thank you, Deborah Bowen. Now, she had to do a conditional recertification because of that HAVA requirement for the disabled, but the way she has it set up is there 1 voting machine per precinct for the disabled to use, and everyone else is now using paper ballots. They are using scanners, and I got to meet Deborah Bowen at a convention in Austin last year, and I said, we really would just like to unplug every machine except for the disabled ballot marking devices where they can mark their ballots in private, but they're counted by hand. Everyone else has hand-counted paper ballots. That's what we'd like to see. And she said, so would I. Secretary of State, your Secretary of State, for those of you who live here, Deborah Bowen, fantastic, heroine in our eyes, and she gets it. She really gets it. We're very grateful for her. So after that study came out, a similar study was done in Ohio by the Secretary of State there, who ended up decertifying touchscreen machines, and then Florida did the same thing. So this ship is just slowly moving, just barely. It's moving here now to scanners. Like, no. So we're trying to educate people that scanners aren't the answer, paper trails aren't the answer. It has to be hand-counted paper ballots. And Germany got it because about 10 days ago, Germany's Federal Constitutional Court ruled electronic voting unconstitutional because it does not meet the standard for transparency in constitutional elections. I've got an article about that out there on my table as well. And here we go. Because transparency of voting is a basic principle of German constitutional law, requiring that all single steps of an election can be checked and be held accountable. That's the thing is, some people say, let's have open source software. How many of you, if you saw open source software, would know what you were looking at? No one person, okay? 2. I wouldn't. What we resent is having to trust somebody, I don't have to trust anybody. I want to be able to cast my ballot in a ballot box, and if I wanted to hang around all day at 7 o'clock, watch that ballot box be unsealed, see the ballots come out, watch them being counted on video camera, and know that my vote's in there, just the way I cast it. That's what we're after. So I would encourage those of you that have maybe a little time, or if you have any time, it's an issue that will only be resolved as more and more people get involved with it. So I want to invite you to join us if this is an issue that lights the fire in your heart. There are groups in every state working on this. We're the Texas group, but we collaborate with groups from all over the country, and we do feel like this is a linchpin issue for all the obvious reasons. We've got to get our elections back. We got to get them out of the hands of corporations, back into the hands of the citizens, and with your help, we will achieve that. Thank you. I don't know if, is there time for questions, right? Or okay, any questions? There's one back there.
You got it, Jeff.
1, 2.
Any idea why, or who controls which party controls the electoral process more? And if it's the Republicans, what was the story with the Obama election?
That's a great question. That's a great question. We don't believe that Obama's election was stolen. We think he won it fair and square. We think there was such an overriding desire for some kind of change that a lot of people just wanted something different. But I think it was pretty clear to us that the Republicans controlled it the last 2 presidential elections. So I think it just goes back and forth. And we have a lot of evidence that both parties have been complicit in this at different levels. So it's not one or the other. Okay?
Or they wanted a scapegoat for the stock market crash.
I'm sorry?
Or they wanted a scapegoat for the stock market crash. Okay. My question, I guess, if they can pretend to get elected, I think the reason the IRS is all over the Patriots is why can't we pretend to pay taxation without representation?
Yeah.
Which is a principle that this country is founded
That's
upon.
right. Couldn't agree more.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
Great. Good. Anybody else?
One more
Okay.
over here.
We got time for one more.
Hi, I just wanted to run this by you. I actually engineered the system I'm about to lay out to you 10 years ago, but basically, whether we do it with electronic or paper, a paper, official paper ballot is printed, and official receipt is printed with a serial number on it, so that each voter can take and look it up on the net and see if their confirmation number was counted correctly. Because if even one ballot is counted incorrectly, there's a problem. And what we need to do is not worry about what has happened in the past, but to do it just like we play Keno, just like we bank, just like we buy our groceries. There's a receipt and there's a statement. And without a receipt and a statement, we are not following the procedure, the business procedure that we've used for thousands of years, which is you have to have a receipt and you have to have a statement.
Well, I appreciate that very much. And that is, we've heard that before. Using the internet for anything to do with voting is not a good idea. And if someone found that their vote had been counted incorrectly, what we find is that as soon as you get away from the counting that happens on election day, every minute that goes by after that, the chances of getting a correction or change get slimmer and slimmer and slimmer. So we just say, although conceptually that's still a better idea than what we have, we just go right back to getting it back on election night and not dealing with going home, getting on the internet, and then having to go back and say my vote wasn't counted properly, and also your vote can be hacked on the internet too. The results can be hacked on the internet too. So those are the problems we see with that. Thank you.